Alright, we've learned a lot about the basic idea of a function, that the positive number in the x squared means it opens up, that the negative number means it opens down. We learned that this tells us to go over 1 and up to and all that good stuff. We also learned that this number here meant something before. The difference now between today's work and yesterday's work and the days before's work is that there's a middle number, which means that this doesn't do the same thing because this number here is throwing it off. I still believe we go over 1 up to and all that stuff that we learned before and that this opens up, but this middle term, the x term, throws off all the other stuff that we learned, so we have to do a little bit extra work. When it says identify the key x, what we have to do is we have to learn that y is equal to a general formula ax squared plus bx plus c. So in this formula here, based off of this, a is equal to 2, b is equal to negative 12, and c is equal to 3 because a is attached to x squared, b is attached to x, which is negative 12, c is a number that's all by itself, and we will use the formula x equals negative b over 2a. What that means is take the opposite of b and then put it over 2 times a. Well, b is negative 12. The opposite of negative 12 is positive 12. A is 2. 2 times 2 is 4, which means that my key x in this case is 3. What that does for me is it gives me a new number instead of 0. Okay? So whenever there is no x term there, you'll just put 0 in the middle. But since there is an x term here and everything's going to be thrown off, you have to find the key x to find out what goes in the middle. And then you surround that with the other numbers like 2 and 1, 4 and 5, and everything else is the same. Again, your key x is found by this formula, which we're going to talk about in a second. But other than that, your key x is found by taking the opposite of b, which b is negative 12, so use a positive 12, over 2 times a, which is 2 times 2, or 4, dividing that to get your key x, which goes right here. Now what we're going to do is plug those numbers in. So this is where your calculator work really starts to pay off. 2 times 1 squared minus 12 parentheses 1 plus 3. Type that in, I get negative 7. Now I want to steal that information, turn my 1's into 2's, and I get negative 13. Now I want to steal that information again, turn my 2's into 3's, and I get negative 15. Same thing, steal that information, turn my 3's into 4's, I get negative 13. And then in the end, turn those into negative 5's to get negative 7. How do I know that I'm right? Because these two things match and those two things match. So the key x, if I would have put 0 in the middle, it would not have worked. But the key x is your center of the parabola. So once you go through that and you find the center of your parabola, that means you now have everything you need to graph it and get the u that you're supposed to have. Alright? So write this down in your notes real fast. After you, of course, if you have questions on this, stop it and ask questions on it. But other than that, after you're done with that, write this down, because this is the keynote you need to have, which is that the key x is the center value. The value of your x that leads to everything else. It leads to the vertex of your parabola. As you can see, if I put this into the calculator with its original formula of 2x squared minus 12x plus 3, you will notice that the parabola, or the sorry, I guess it doesn't show, but since 3 was a number, that means that the vertex is actually located somewhere in that line. So you'd be able to find the vertex that way. But other than that, like I said, negative b over 2a is what you will use. It means take the opposite of b and divide it by whatever 2 times a is. Graph the function y is equal to negative 6, or x squared minus 6x plus 4. Again, the fact that we have an x term means we cannot do like we did before, and so we have to find the key x. So we have to identify a, b, and c. A, because there's nothing there, is 1. Remember, that's a 1 there. B is negative 6, c is 4. The formula for the key x is x equals negative b over 2a. So b being negative 6 means I use a positive 6 because that's what the opposite of b is. 2 times a is 2 times 1, or 2. which means once again my key X is 3. And so when I go to make my chart, 3 goes in the middle, and it gets surrounded by the other numbers that surround it on the number line. I then have to use my calculator skill to do some work. So parentheses, because that's X, so 1 squared minus 6 times 1 plus 4, which is -1. I then steal that information again, turn my 1's into 2's, which makes -4. Turn that into a 3. I get -5. Turn that into a 4. And I get -4, which tells me I'm doing it right. And then you can assume at this point that the last thing is going to be -1, although we will check it. But if the second one matched the second matched the fourth, the fifth is typically going to match the first. And so now we plot this. 1 -1 means go over 1, down 1. 2 -4 means go over 2, 1, 2, 3, down 4. 3 -5 means go over 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, down 5. This means go over 1, 2, 3, 4, down 4. And this means go over 5 and down 1. And when you draw your U, you have your general sketch like this. I want you to pay attention to the fact that this meant we should go over 1, down 1, or sorry, over 1, up 1, and notice that's still what we did. So you can still apply the x squared coefficient rule, we just can't apply the 4 because that didn't do what it usually does, but that's only because that 6 is here. But that over 1, up 1 still works for it, and it's going to go that way. Alright. So now let's do something real fast on the graphing calculator. Again, if you're stuck on this, please pause your video, bring your computer over to me, and ask about what you need to know. But for right now, what I want to do is I want to graph this on the calculator and find the vertex using the calculator. So going back to this formula here, I want to go to y equals, which is what you want to do. Please do this with me. So y is equal to x squared. Make sure you again have this in your calculator when it's over with, minus 6x plus 4. You then hit the graph button. And what we can do is we can actually find the vertex. We want to calculate, C-A-L-C. We want to calculate the vertex. Notice again, calculate is above trace, so we hit second trace. The trick here is that when we go back to our y or our graph real fast, this is not a, they don't really call it a vertex on here, they either call it a maximum or a minimum, but based off of what I know, this is a minimum value. And so what we want to do is second calculate the minimum. And so what it does, if you notice, if you hit the left and right arrows, you see this little thing moving up and down. It's kind of tracing the graph. And if you notice, this is saying what's the left bound. That's in other words, that's saying pick a point to the left of where you want to calculate. So once you're somewhere on the left side, doesn't matter where you are, hit enter. Now it wants something on the right side, which means you have to be on the right side of what you're trying to calculate. Since this is what I'm looking for, push the arrow until that x gets somewhere on the right side of it, and hit enter again. And then the last thing you do is hit enter a third time, and it gives me the vertex. Now notice that based off of this, the vertex is 3, -5. Based off of this, it's 3 point a whole bunch of stuff, a whole bunch of zeros, 2, 5, comma, -5. What happens is your x is not as accurate as it should be, so this is actually 3. But the bottom line is that you know now that your lowest point on this graph is -5, and we'll be using that tomorrow when we go to do that work. So again, going back to this graph here, if you're going to find the max or the min, you hit second trace, identify what you're looking for, pick something on, and if you pick it the wrong way, you have to pick something on the left bound, means pick something on the left side, which doesn't matter where I'm at. I'm going to pick a different spot somewhere over here. Right side means, oops, so second trace again, calculate the minimum. Again, I'm going to pick somewhere up here first. For your right side, let's just pick somewhere a little bit lower, but definitely on the right side of that minimum, just to show you that it doesn't matter as long as your bound is in between those two things, you get the same answer no matter what. Okay, so make sure you understand that and write this before you move on. what you want to write is that if you want to identify the vertex, which would be the max or the min, use second trace. That is a note that you want to have for yourself that you might need later. And by later, I mean right now. So you might need to pause that to write it before I put this guided instruction up. But here are the 3 questions that you're going to do today. So again, remember to do this on a separate sheet of paper, work together, show your work. Number 1, I just want you to do what we did on problem 1, which is identify the key x and create a table. Number 2, I want you to graph the actual function. So actually give me the table and the graph, the picture of it. And then number 3, use a graphing calculator to tell me what the vertex is. And this will help you out in terms of electronics to make sure you understand what's going on there. Again, use each other, use me, take your time, and remember that this is part of your classroom grade, so you want to make sure you get this thing done. It's just 3 questions, and again, make sure you are working to get these things completed. Good luck.